Thank you for joining. I can see some people are starting to come in, so just gonna give it a few more seconds to let everyone log in and join. Thank you for those of you who have joined already. My name is Colleen. I am a registered dietitian and a certified diabetes care and education specialist. And today I'm going to be presenting to you on low carb hacks. So as we started off the new year a couple weeks ago, almost 2 full weeks ago, you may have been trying to follow a lower carb way of eating, or just looking at how many carbs you're taking in. This tends to be the time of year when people start to fall off. Maybe you had every intention of following a low carb diet, but now you're realizing you don't exactly know how to do it. So today I'm going to be giving you some tips, some tricks, some products that you can look at to incorporate that low carb way of eating. So you have the how to information to combine with the knowledge that you may already have about a low carb way of eating. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to share some slides. I'm going to share my screen to bring up the presentation. So just bear with me one moment while I do that. All right, so here we go, low carb hacks. All right, so this afternoon, I'm going to be going over some of the benefits of eating a low carb diet or reducing your overall carb intake. I'm going to go over the foods that you want to include and the foods that you want to avoid, and then giving you some hacks for each meal, breakfast, lunch, dinner, as well as snacks, and then some of those condiments and miscellaneous items that do have carbohydrates, maybe sometimes hidden carbohydrates. And then I'll be going over some tips for eating out. Of course, you're not going to be cooking all of your meals at home. Maybe you are, that's great, but a lot of us do rely on foods from restaurants. So I'm going to be giving you some tips for when you're eating out and how to stay on a low carb way of eating. All right, so just briefly, I would like to go over some of the benefits of a low carb way of eating or just reducing your carb intake. If you're here, I am venturing to guess you probably are well versed in this area. There is probably a reason or several reasons why you have made a decision to cut back on your carb intake. But I will just review them. You may even learn something new, another benefit of eating a lower carb diet that you weren't aware of. So first, obviously, if you are cutting back on carbohydrates, the goal would be probably that you're cutting back on calories as well, particularly empty calories. So carbohydrates are sugars. So some of the higher sugar foods that we're all aware of, cakes and cookies, maybe things we indulged in over the holidays are going to be higher in carbs and sugar. Those are empty calories. You're not really getting a lot of nutrition from those. But even stuff like bread and cereal can add a lot of extra calories to your diet without adding a lot of nutrition. So that's what we're talking about when we say empty calories. If you are cutting back on your carbs, the goal then probably would be to increase some more nutrient-dense foods and to increase foods like protein and healthy fats. These will keep you satisfied for longer so that you're not feeling super hungry in between meals, that you're not snacking as much maybe, so that you can kind of stay focused on following the plan that you have set out for yourself. And the reason, really, just to kind of get a little sciencey on you, the reason that this helps is because when we eat carbohydrates, the body releases insulin in response. Okay, so when you consume a carbohydrate, it's broken down into sugar inside your body. And the way that we get that sugar where it needs to go is to release insulin to help bring the sugar where it needs to go, okay, for storage. Insulin is a fat storage hormone, though. So when we are eating higher amounts of carbohydrates, we're releasing more sugar into our body, and our body is releasing more insulin, more of that fat storage hormone in response. So cutting back on your carbohydrates, replacing your carbohydrates with proteins and fats is going to help that insulin response so that you're not having as much of that fat burning hormone circulating throughout your body. The other thing is that when you're eating higher carbohydrates and your body's pumping out that insulin, once your blood sugar returns to normal, that's when you start to feel hungry again. Sometimes it even dips below normal. You're going to feel maybe energy dips. So having a more protein balanced diet, a higher fat diet is going to keep those blood sugar levels stable and control the amount of insulin that your body is secreting. So that goes for lower glucose levels also is going to equal more energy. So I know a lot of us maybe think of a low carb diet as a way to lose weight, but it really can help with energy levels, especially those late afternoon dips in energy that many of us feel. So considering like a higher protein, higher fat lunch is going to usually give you more energy to finish out the day. And then some of you may be here because you're following a very low carbohydrate diet to induce ketosis for fat burning. So that is another benefit of following a low carb way of eating. So in general, I'm going to give you more specifics as we go on, but in general, what we want to include in our diet, if we're doing a lower carb way of eating, is your protein. So meat, any type of fish or chicken or beef, pork, and fish also is a great way to get your protein in. The smash fish, salmon, mackerel, anchovy, sardines, and herring are particularly beneficial. Eggs, of course, fats. So we're looking at healthy sources of fat. So oils, a grass-fed butter, ghee, avocado oil, or avocado. Non-starchy veggies, dairy products, if you're including dairy in your diet. So stuff like cheese. Nuts and seeds. Nuts and seeds are healthy fats. They do contain carbohydrates, so we can't go crazy with those. Fruit. Okay, so this is a little bit of a misconception. A lot of people believe when you're following a low carb diet that you can't include any fruit. That isn't necessarily true, but you do want to focus on the fruits that are lower in carbohydrates and lower in a glycemic index. Those tend to be the berries. So if you're going to include small amounts of fruit in your diet, I definitely recommend focusing on berries. And then we want to look at beverages as well. So looking at sugar-free beverages, of course, water, coffee, herbal teas. There are even, alcoholic drinks that are lower in carbohydrates to consider. Of course, not something that you want to include all the time, especially if your goal is to lose weight. And then foods to minimize. I'm sure it doesn't come as much of a surprise, but those processed sugars, the sweets are things you're going to want to minimize in your diet, as well as starchy foods. So potatoes and pasta, cereal, quinoa, chips, our food, oatmeal, are foods you're going to want to limit a low carb diet. And again, going back to alcohol, if you're consuming alcohol, you definitely want to be smart about the type of alcohol you're consuming and cut out any of the sugary cocktails, sweet wines, a sangria, margarita. Those are going to add a lot of extra sugar, or even beer are going to add a lot of extra sugar and carbohydrates to your diet. All right, so now what do you eat? I just told you what to focus on, what to avoid. So how do we make this happen? So starting with breakfast, bring on the bacon and eggs. Bacon and eggs were notorious for having sort of a bad rep in the breakfast world years ago because they were thought to really drive up triglycerides and cholesterol. But they are going to be perhaps a staple that you're going to fall back on if you are following a low carb diet. And that's because a lot of traditional breakfast foods are really high in carbohydrates. So I know as a kid, I started off almost every day with a bowl of cereal with milk. And it's no wonder that by lunchtime I was starving and usually came home kind of tired because my blood sugar was having a major swing in that early morning hours when I really needed to focus on schoolwork. But your traditional breakfast foods are going to be high in carbs. So cereal and milk, both sources of carbs. A smaller portion is 35 grams. Pancakes, they're about 11 grams each. So if you have three, that's 33 grams. Muffins and bagels, these can really, I'm sure you know, vary in size. They're probably going to be a lot, at least 60 grams of carbs, if not more. And that's a lot of simple sugars also. That's going to really spike blood sugar. You're going to feel that energy crash and probably hungry after eating something like that. The good news is that because low carb has really become a very popular way of eating, that there are a lot of low carb options that you can find on your store shelves. And a lot of these are even in your regular grocery stores. It used to be that you had to go to like a specialty grocery store or Whole Foods to find these items. But I'm seeing these on my grocery store shelves more and more. And hopefully in your area that you can find some of these options as well. So for yogurt, a traditional yogurt is going to be at least 12 grams of carbohydrates most times, if not more. Sweetened yogurt or like a yogurt with fruit on the bottom is going to be maybe upwards of 20 plus grams of carbohydrates because of the added sugar. Milk is a natural sugar. So even an unsweetened yogurt is going to be about 12 grams of carbs. But these are some options. I just pulled up a few, but there are definitely low carb keto options for yogurt if that's something you would like to enjoy in the morning. So there's Keto Ratio, Too Good, Kite Hill, Greek almond yogurt, and Carb Master. And as you can see, these are going to range in carbs from 2 net grams to 5 net grams. So really pretty low, even something that might fit on a keto diet, where the net carb goal is significantly lower than someone who's just watching their carb intake or trying to cut back a little bit. Okay, next we have pancakes and waffles. So you wouldn't think of these as foods that you could enjoy on a low carb or keto diet necessarily, but with modifications, sure, this might be something that you can add in. So if you remember a couple minutes ago, I was telling you that pancakes are typically about 11 grams of carbohydrates, and that's for a pretty small pancake. If you go to like a pancake house, it's going to be double, triple, quadruple that. Plus then if you're adding syrup to it or jelly or jam, that's going to add more sugar. So that can be like, if you go to IHOP, I don't know, or a breakfast restaurant, a plate of pancakes and syrup or jam is going to be upwards of like 100 grams of carbs. It's insane. So there are some low carb options that you can consider. There's flour substitutes that you've probably seen, stuff like almond flour or coconut flour, and then sugar substitutes. So stuff like monk fruit, or other, sugar substitutes that you can sweeten it with, and then using a low carb milk. So you can even pull up a regular recipe for pancakes or waffles and just make those substitutions, or Google low carb pancake or waffle recipe. You're going to find a bunch. And then there are mixes. There are pre-made mixes that you can also consider if you don't want to make it, get all the ingredients on your own. I listed a couple here. There's King Arthur, Birch, Bender's Keto, and Simple Keto. And you can see they're pretty low in total net carbs. Next, cereal. I was just explaining to you how cereal can be terrible for energy levels and keeping you satisfied throughout the morning because of the amount of carbs that typical cereals have. But good news, if you are a cereal lover, there are low carb options to consider. So before I get into some of the options on the shelf, I just want to give you some other ways to consider, or other things to consider if you do want to have cereal. One, first of all, is the milk. You want to look at subbing regular milk for an unsweetened or lower carb milk, because like I mentioned with yogurt, milk has a natural sugar. So it does have it has protein, but it has natural sugar, that lactose. The other thing to think about with all of these meals is increasing the protein, because protein is really going to help how much your glucose rises after a meal. It's also going to help to keep you full for longer. So if you're having a higher protein intake with something that has carbohydrates, your body is not going to release as much of that insulin, that fat storage hormone, as a meal lower in protein. So for cereal, the Fairlife milk is a regular milk, but it's lower in sugar. It's also higher in protein. It has 13 grams of protein, whereas a regular milk only has about 8 grams. You could also add protein to really, anything that you can mix protein powder into, like a smoothie, for instance, or even just water. But if you're having cereal, you can mix it in with that milk. A collagen peptides is just one I recommended because it really mixes very nicely. It's not going to really change the consistency of the liquid. So that might be one to think about, especially for meals that are a little bit lower on the protein side. And then there's these protein cereals. So if they may not necessarily be low carb or fit into a keto diet, but if you go down your cereal aisle in the supermarket, you're going to notice that companies are kind of getting smart about the focus on protein. So they're just adding protein to stuff like oatmeal or your traditional cereals. But there are a couple that are more keto friendly or low carb friendly that I listed here: Wonderworks, Magic Spoon, and Catalina Crunch. Keep the keto-friendly variety are a few. I've seen these even in like Target, Walmart, so they're becoming more accessible. And they're pretty low in net carbs most of the time. Take a look. They can vary, obviously, brand to brand. And the way they are able to be so low carb is that they're utilizing allulose or sugar alcohols, which will add some sweetness, but your body actually doesn't digest them at all. So it's not affecting your glucose at all, or you're not absorbing these. The thing to kind of be careful with about these is that because of the way that they are not being digested, kind of just going through your system, go slowly to kind of avoid any GI types of issues, just to make sure you're able to tolerate them. Okay, low carb bread. So bread, as I mentioned earlier, isn't necessarily giving us a whole lot of nutrition, but is a food that a lot of us enjoy. So if you're having a sandwich, just a regular slice of sandwich bread is going to be 15 grams per slice. So that sandwich is going to be at least 30 grams of carbs. If you're going for a different type of bread, a roll or a panini type of bread, obviously that's going to add more carbohydrates. One thing I would challenge you to think about is eliminating the bread. Do we really need to have bread to have a sandwich? You really could have a sandwich or a burger with a piece of lettuce instead of using the bread to make it super low carb. I heard somewhere that, bread is really just the vehicle to help get the food into our mouth, but you could use another vehicle. You could use a lettuce wrap and just as easily get that meat or burger into your mouth. So something to consider. There is something that has been trending. If you're on social media, you may have seen it. It's called cloud bread. It's a mixture of egg whites, cornstarch, and sweetener that people are using. It's very low carb or zero carbs. People are using as a bread alternative. I haven't personally tried it, but it definitely looks interesting. And then again, these companies are getting very smart, realizing people don't want a lot of carbs. So they're making lower carb versions of their breads or wraps. So you can find these on your store shelves. I think I've seen all of these in my regular supermarket. The Arnold's Keto Bread, Mission Carb Balance, and 647 are just a couple. There's going to be lots of other ones that you can probably find as well. Okay, so what do you eat for lunch? Sandwiches, going back to my childhood, I think I had a sandwich almost every day packed in my lunchbox with regular, probably white bread or potato bread. So if you are also a former sandwich eater, you may have to kind of get creative with what you have for lunch if you're switching over to a lower carb type of diet. So here are some ideas. There's, of course, salad. There's a million things you could do with a salad. You could use different types of lettuce, different types of veggies, different types of protein, and then different add-ins. Maybe you throw in some cheese or some nuts, different types of dressings, definitely looking at low sugar options, but a lot of ways to add variety and to mix it up when it comes to salad. Soup is another great one, especially if you're in an area that's cold this time of year, like I am. Soup is also very versatile, adding, different types of protein, maybe even leftover protein from dinner. You can add into a soup with your leftover veggies. It can be super easy to get that going. And then if you make a big batch of it, you could freeze it or eat it throughout the week. Chicken and tuna salad are another options, just having them maybe over lettuce or without bread and not making it a sandwich, just eating those, maybe even mixed in with avocado. For a healthy fat, that's another idea. Deli roll-ups, if you have deli meat and you want to just roll it up maybe with some cheese instead of using bread, you can consider that. Adult bento boxes have become very popular. If you Google adult bento box lunch ideas, there's going to be a lot of ideas that come up. But if you are packing lunch for work, purchasing a bento box and then just throwing in maybe even leftover items that you have in the house or low carb snacks that you have, that can actually then turn out to be a meal. So I just gave you a couple ideas of things that you could pack in a bento box: eggs, carrot sticks, cheese, nuts, but there's a million different combinations that you can consider. We talked already about having a sandwich without the bread, using lettuce. And then I recommend, I personally do this, having a rotisserie chicken in your fridge at all times. It's a really great way if you're trying to throw together a quick meal. You don't have to cook it, you just have to cut it up. Or I put it in soup. So instead of boiling the chicken or whatever, cooking the chicken, I will just cut up the rotisserie chicken and throw in veggies. It can be used for if you're having that chicken salad. So this is definitely a staple that you might want to consider as you're transitioning to a lower carb way of eating. Dinner. Okay, so for dinners, probably you want to focus mostly on your protein, so your chicken, your fish, your beef, whatever, your pork, and then a vegetable to go along with it, whatever your preference is. But there are some ways to incorporate lower carb substitutions if you're used to having stuff like pasta and rice and potatoes and stuff like that for your meal, with your meal. A spiralizer, I'm going to see if I can click on this, is a great thing to invest in if you don't have one. You can spiralize different types of vegetables. It's not letting me click on it. Is it? No. Okay, but there was just a link to Amazon with different options for spiralizers. They can be really cheap. You can get more advanced ones, but it's a good thing to kind of keep in your kitchen to make zucchini noodles or carrot noodles, different types of noodles out of vegetables to add into a dish. There's a recipe you can Google for keto egg noodles, which it's cream cheese, eggs, butter, and almond flour. It's 0 net carbs. And if you're not a DIY type of person, there's lots of options that you can find on your store shelves. There's the Sarataki noodles, fresh or frozen veggie noodles. So like a zucchini noodle you can usually find in your produce section or frozen in the frozen aisle. And then here's another skinny pasta that I included. Same thing for rice. You could make it yourself with a food processor using like cauliflower, broccoli, carrots, really any vegetable. You could get creative with that. There's also skinny pasta rice at 0 net carbs. There's miracle rice. So these are using plant type of ingredients that are not contributing carbs. They're actually, I think the skinny pasta is actually 0 calories as well, and skinny rice. Pizza, I think sometimes when people think of a low carb diet, they immediately start to think of the foods that they're not going to be able to have. And you really can include any type of food as long as you're making some modifications. So pizza is one of those foods that was a higher carb type of meal, but there's definitely options if you want to include pizza in your diet. There's cauliflower pizza crust, which you can make yourself or purchase. Just be careful. I have seen cauliflower crust in the store that's really not low in carb at all. So be careful and look at the label with that. There's King Arnold makes a pizza crust mix if you don't want to buy the ingredients yourself. If you Google keto pizza crust recipe, there's going to be lots of options that come up there. And then here's a couple products that you could also consider for pizza. The Thin Slim Foods 0 carb pizza crust, and the Quest thin pizza crust. That's 6 net carbs. Other ideas for dinner, just a couple. If you're kind of getting stuck, but stir fries are really great for dinner, cutting up different vegetables and combining it with a protein like a chicken or shrimp. And then maybe not even using a carbohydrate. We're substituting like a cauliflower rice instead of regular rice. We talked about your main focus with dinner. You want to focus on your protein and your veggies. Soup, again, that could be a dinner if you're making a soup, making it in batches, or even pulling it out of your freezer if you made it ahead of time. And then burgers meat with a lettuce bun. So cutting back on the carbohydrates and using lettuce instead of a regular bun. Snack ideas. So in general, I'm not a huge proponent of recommending snacks. I think that focusing on getting most of your nutrition through meals is more beneficial. But of course, we need to have some snack options if you're really running short on time, or for times where you're hungry in between your meals that just get you through. So first and foremost, you want to focus on whole food types of snacks. So maybe a hard-boiled egg, olives, veggies, just a couple of ideas. You can also consider things like cheese, cottage cheese or regular cheese, deli meat, a protein shake, and tuna packet is another idea. And then there's more processed but lower carb types of packaged snacks that you can also consider. There's Quest protein chips, they're 4 net carbs. Wisps, which is like a cheese type snack, is 1 net carb. Only Bean edamame snack, 2 net carbs. And these beef sticks are 0 net carbs. So things maybe you want to keep in your office or in your car, in your bag for when you're running around and may not have time to get a meal in. Okay, condiments and sauces. I don't think it's going to let me open these links. I'm not sure. But the condiments and sauces can be hidden sources of sugars and carbohydrates. So you really want to take a look at the label. Stuff like ketchup and barbecue sauce, there's a lot of hidden sugar in those. So be careful. There are lower carb options. Again, these companies are getting smart, realizing people don't want added sugars. So they're making lower carb versions of those products. Tomato sauce is another one that can have a lot of added sugar. Listed 2 that are a little bit lower. The Prego No Sugar Added has 7 net carbs. The traditional version of that has 11. And Rayo's has 5 net carbs. So you want to look and make sure, if you look at the label, that they're not sneaking sugar in there. Some of the products do, so be careful with that. Beverages, again, we touched on this, but you want to focus on drinks that are not adding extra sugar into your diet. With alcohol, stuff like a dry wine is going to be lower in carbs. Beers or cocktails are going to be more. Okay, when you're eating out. So just some tips for when you're eating out. If you know where you're eating and the menu's posted online, take a look at that ahead of time and kind of plan out what you may order. Maybe look up the nutrition facts if you're unsure if those are available. Don't be afraid to ask for substitutions. So for example, if the meal comes with potatoes, maybe sub it for a veggie if you can. Ask for the burger with a lettuce bun. I'm sure the restaurants are used to requests like that. It's not like a bizarre request. So go ahead and ask for something like that. We talked about subbing the side or even asking for a different cooking method. So a crispy type of chicken, for example, is going to have breading because it's fried. So asking to sub out the crispy chicken for a grilled chicken will cut back on the carbs in that meal. Okay, beverages we talked about. Consider ordering off of the appetizer menu. Typically, portions in restaurants are huge. Appetizers are going to give you a smaller portion, so that might be something to consider. And then, again, focusing on dishes that are high in protein, high in veggies, and lower in carbs. Okay, so to summarize, we discussed the benefits of eating a low carb diet, some of the general practices, foods to include, foods to avoid, and then how to actually do that with ideas for your meals and snacks and packaged products that you might want to consider. And then we wrapped up by talking about some tips for eating out. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to see if there are any questions. All right, so let me see. Okay, so there are some questions I'm going to go through. First question, how low carb diet for me? I have trying it, doesn't work for me, and I still get hungry. Okay, so if you're getting hungry, I would really focus on those proteins and those fat sources. Make sure that you're getting enough protein with each meal. If you're cutting out carbohydrates, you've got to replace it with something else. Protein is especially very filling. I would focus on that first to make sure that at each meal you're getting a decent amount of protein. The amount of protein that you're going to need is really going to be dependent on on you, whether you're looking to lose weight, your current weight, your height, your age, stuff like that. So I can't give you an amount, but focusing on a good protein intake is going to help so that you're not feeling hungry. How do you get past that irresistible carb craving? Okay, so carb cravings are, it could be habit. You could be used to every day after lunch, I have a treat. So that is something that you may have to replace having a treat with either something that may taste sweet. Something that work for people are like a sweetened, and not a sweetened, but like a flavored tea, like a passion tea that's 0 carbs, 0 calories, or like a chai latte. But probably a lot of your carb cravings are related to blood sugar swings. So when your blood sugar is dipping, your body's hungry. Your body wants food, and it wants food from those those quickly absorbed carbohydrates, sugar. So you're going to be craving sugar when you're having major blood sugar swings. So focusing on cutting back on your carbs and minimizing those blood sugar swings by focusing on more protein and fat is going to help keep you steady throughout the day so that you're not craving those foods as much. How do you count carbs, net carbs, etc.? How much is too much to still lose weight? Labels are confusing. Okay, so the amount of carbs that you are going to need is really going to be dependent, again, on who you are and what your goals are. So I can't give you an exact amount, but when you're looking at a label, you're going to see listed total carbohydrates. You're also going to see sugars and fiber. Some foods that are more keto focused will also list the net carbs. But it's a simple calculation to get the net carbs. Net carbs is your total carbohydrates, and you're going to subtract out your fiber. So if there's 10 grams of hydrates and 5 grams of fiber, then that food has 5 grams of net carbs. Sugars, fibers, that's all considered in the total carbohydrate amount. So it's really just a simple calculation to get the net carbs. Not a question, an observation. I've always found it interesting that the healthier the food, the higher the cost, making much of it out of budget range. Okay, well, so yeah, when you're looking at foods that are packaged, a lot of times they are at a higher price because of the ingredients that are put into them. Cheap ingredients like sugar, corn, for instance, don't cost the companies as much as some of these other ingredients are going to cost. I would encourage you to focus mostly on whole foods rather than packaged foods when you're on a budget. So, your veggies, your proteins, and consider, looking for things when they're on sale, buying them in bulk, freezing them if possible. You don't necessarily have to get fresh veggies and fresh fruits. You can do frozen, you can do canned, that's fine. But also looking at, the foods that aren't providing a lot of nutrition benefit to you and seeing where you can cut back on those to make some room in your budget for other foods that are providing more nutritional value. Okay. And then I have not a question. This is for the person that asked how to count carbo. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I skipped over that. How to count carbohydrates. Yeah, there's different, you can put it into an app to count carbohydrates. You can look on the food label and just keep track, but there's different ways, different tools to use to count carbohydrates. Are Quest products good? It's going to depend on the product and the ingredients. I don't know off the top of my head the entire ingredient formulation, so I would have to look at that in more detail. But if we're talking about carbs, the focus of today's talk, you want to look at the total carbohydrate amount and subtract out that fiber to see if that net carb is going to fit into your diet to meet your goals. Okay. All right. I am not seeing any other questions come in. So I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much for everybody that participated and asked those great questions. I certainly hope that you picked up a tip or two and are able to apply this to your new eating plan or to continue eating on this low carb way of eating. So thank you very much. And I hope you all have a great weekend. Bye-bye.